chapter 6. So here we go. As I said before, chapter 6, June 1958. We're starting on the printed copy in page 48. The back door eased open, and I crept up the stairs to my bedroom. Florinda leaned against the worn bed rest, with the hand-embroidered white bedspread tucked neatly around her legs. Outside, the wind started to pick up, and branches from the umbrella pine waved in front of the full moon, creating a creepy atmosphere in our bedroom. At least, the lamp was placed on the bedside table between our two single beds, provided a cozy, reassuring glow. I dropped my bag and kicked off my Cabezio flats. No one had seen or heard me come up the stone steps. The only one who might have spotted me was Vittorio. He never missed anything. But tonight, he was nowhere in sight. Right. What's going on? Florinda folded her arms high across her chest. She wanted her answer. I wouldn't tolerate any tall story. I gazed around the room, the haven of peace where we shared all our secrets, before undressing and slipping on my nightgown. I bounced onto my bed. The springs creaked under my weight, and freshly ironed sheets escaped from the sides. With the pillow pulled over my face, I breathed in my mother's scent. I'd miss all this. Adjusting the pillow under my head, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. Well? Florinda asked, her expression solemn. Could I trust my sister on this? If my plans ever got out, I'd regret it. Vittorio would make sure of that. I'm leaving home. Florinda sat bolt upright. What do you mean, leaving home? Have I missed an episode somewhere? Anna and I are going to England. Everything's ready. Passports, visas, all medical examinations have been done too. My pulse rate came on faster and faster as the words tumbled out. Thank you for that whisper, Redeem MLS. I appreciate it. Florinda stared at me, mouth agape, and for a brief moment I felt sorry for her. Sorry that she'd been left behind. Sorry she'd never been strong enough to make decisions. She hadn't asked for this life either. But, whereas she was prepared to accept it, I wasn't. Why? How? My sister couldn't manage any more than a strangled whisper. You and Anna don't even speak English. Ornella does, and she's coming with us. Who the hell's Ornella? I can't believe one word of all this. Stop getting yourself so worked up. Ornella is one of Anna's neighbors. When did you organize all this? Florinda sniffed. Florinda sniffed. I opened my mouth to speak, but she blurted out the answer. It was during your apprenticeship in Naples with the three sisters, wasn't it? I nodded and sat up. They helped with the most of the paperwork, especially the medical visit. One girl from Calgary in Sardinia didn't pass the exam. Tuberculosis. I was so scared I wouldn't get chosen. I was near vomiting. Florinda pulled hard on the skin around her thumbnail. So, you're going then? I didn't think you were serious. I reached out and grabbed her hand. If she went on picking at her thumb, she'd make herself bleed. Did you honestly think I'd sit back and let that idiot dictate my life to me? You can't do this to me, Bianca. Do what? Leave me, she yelled. Tears welled up, and I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping to block them out. Impossible. Warm drops trickled down my cheeks. Mama needs you here, Florinda. Someone has to help look after the boys. Besides, you don't have a passport, and I'm leaving in 3 days. She put her thumb to her mouth. We need to talk seriously about this. There's nothing to say. I've thought it all through. Florinda stared at me, obviously desperate to talk. There was no point. Nothing would make me change my mind. Do you think leaving is such a good choice? She asked, drying her tears. Better than staying here. I took a drink from the bottle of water on the bedside table. I've got a chance to make something of my life. If I don't give it a go, I'll regret it. Besides, if things don't work out, I'll come back. It's a 6-month contract to start with. I avoided telling her that the job had nothing to do with sewing. Factories in the food industry in England were looking for girls to work. I was lucky that Anna had fallen on the job advertisement. I had to take one step at a time. The first one was to get out of Italy. That opportunity had popped up, and I was taking it. Finding a job in dressmaking would come later. What if something goes wrong, and you don't come back? She said, wide-eyed. Or you get kidnapped, or forced into prostitution. My sister had always had a vivid imagination. Stop being silly, I chuckled, although my own words didn't stop my heart from thumping in my chest. You've never been further than Naples, and you leap straight onto the high-speed wagon cart of the other side of the channel. You don't even speak the language. My sister was concerned, but I stood my ground, too stubborn to double back and jack it all in. Anna and I spent months organizing things. It wouldn't be fair to let my friend down either. Like I kept telling myself, it was only 6 months. Hi, Charax. Hope you're well. Florinda punched her pillow. We need to get some sleep. She switched off the bedside lamp and plopped her head down. Think about what I said, Bianca. I gazed into the darkness, mulling over my sister's words. She loved overreacting. Yet her words frightened me. Was I making a big mistake? A mistake I'd regret later? Enjoying the migraines? Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we're keeping it chill in here. So you stay as long as you need to. But what life was there here? Living in a village, married to a man my father would choose, and in the meantime being looked after by my brother. I wanted freedom to live as I pleased. To prove to myself that I could achieve something in life. Life as a clothes designer had been running through my mind for a while. Be part of a famous fashion house, have my own boutique even. These dreams would never come true in Italy. Not a lot of women had careers here, even fewer women who belonged to the Lombardi clan. No. I had to get away if I wanted to have a chance to make a name for myself. Leave my family and start afresh. I turned onto my side and fell asleep. Daylight beamed on my eyelids, and birds filled the quiet morning air with elated chirping. I stifled a groan and rubbed my eyes. The bed next to me was empty. I haven't even heard Florinda get up and leave. I must have been dead to the world once sleep finally took over my mind. The mid-June morning breeze fluttered the net curtains. I needed to close the shutters. That warm air would soon change into muggy heat, adding to my irritation. But my legs refused to move. My mind wouldn't focus on anything other than my apprehension. I was distracted by delighted laughter from the piazza. What I'd give to change places with those carefree kids, to laugh and play with no worries. When had things changed? One minute I'd been a kid. Now I was a teenager, watching my back, always on the lookout for my brother. I headed to the window and closed the shutters. Another night captured by insomnia. Another long day ahead. One I wasn't looking forward to. Only a few days remained before my departure, and I needed to tell my parents. I've been able to keep all this to myself for months, but now it was time to reveal everything. In a flash, I grabbed my clothes and dressed. Besides, England wasn't at the other end of the world, and Anna was going with me. Vittorio ambled down the corridor from his room, hands smoothing back his well-trained hair, humming a tune. I stared at his back, memories surging to the front of my mind. The flash of anger on seeing him fortified me from any regret. When he disappeared out of sight, I dragged my feet down the stairs and into the kitchen, where Mamma stood next to the kitchen stove, mumbling under her breath while she stirred the tomato sauce for lunch. Sharp pain twanged in my chest, and my throat tightened. Yes, my doggy was barking. It was fantastic. Nothing like a good dog bark to interrupt everything. It wasn't fair to bring her pain, but I refused to accept the life my father had set out for me. Morning, Bianca. A tired glint darkened her eyes, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Why should she suffer? Then again, she'd never stood up to our father. Never once had she defended us. Surely, she wasn't scared of him. So maybe she believed what he did to be right. With no parents to guide the way, and the nuns distracting her life in the orphanage, Mama had never made any decisions. She simply followed the rules set out. And that continued when she left the orphanage to marry at the age of 21. She obeyed Papa without questioning. 1 second passed. 2 seconds passed, then 3. Anxiety aided me, burning my thoughts. My throat dried up, my pulse echoed in my ears. Remorse hit me like a sledgehammer. The longer I left it, the worse it would get. This oppressive burden got heavier by the day. If I didn't speak about it today, it would crush me. I kissed my mother's cheek. Where's Papa? He left early to hunt. It was now or never. Florinda was at work. I'd seen Vittorio leave, and my 3 younger brothers were at school. I'm leaving, Mama. She continued stirring the sauce. A warm smile etched her face. For Napoli again? My bottom lip quivered. There was no simple way to break the news. I'd loved to return to Naples, to the apartment in the school grounds where I'd lodged during my apprenticeship in Piazza del Municipio, and all that went with it. Sightseeing? Opera? Museums? A girl's dream. That had been short-term, though. My father had done what he deemed best for the family. He wanted to be proud of his daughters when they married a man of his choice. A woman who would sew and use her dressmaking skills would make her husband happy. Or so my father believed. I let out the breath I'd been holding. Not for Napoli. For England. The wooden spoon dropped from my mother's hand, and tomatoes splattered over the stove. She stumbled backwards and turned. All color had drained from her face. Dio mio! Dio mio! She shrieked, burying her face in her hands. Her gut-wrenching sobs filled the kitchen. If I'd reckoned getting this off my chest would relieve me of my burden, it didn't. Pain worsened. I blinked to hold back my tears. She took her head out of her hands, and I caught the grief in her eyes. Guilt gnawed at me, burning like a fire feasting on dry wood. It's only for 6 months, I said, trying to soften the blow. Deep down, I knew nothing would cushion the shock. Have I been a bad mother to you? She asked, ignoring the tears streaming down her face. My heart was about to break. I'm sorry if I hurt you, Bianca. I did my best with all of you. She pulled a hanky from her sleeve and dabbed her eyes. I tried. I really tried. It's just... I never learned how to bring up a family. The nuns never spoke about that. Her words splintered my insides, and I hated myself. Nothing could have prepared me for this. My breath came in ragged. Shallow gasps, I dashed into her arms and hugged her close. It's not your fault, Mama. It's Vittorio and Papa. We both cried. It made us both feel guilty. I couldn't take back my words or actions. Filling my nose with my mother's lavender fragrance, I placed my head on her shoulder and kept whispering in her ear that I'd be fine. I'll talk to your father, she said after a while. My mother's words made me catch my breath. I pulled back and gazed into her pale eyes. How would she manage that without Papa spinning into a fury? As if she could read my mind, she rubbed away the frown set on my forehead and whispered, Don't worry, child. I know how to handle him. Haven't I lived with him for all these years? Yes, she had. She'd stood by him, obeying without a harsh word, never complaining, never questioning his decisions, looking after the house and trying to look after the children. I trusted Mama would know how to tell him. That afternoon, Papa called me into his study. Whatever he said, it wouldn't change my mind. I was going, and that was the bottom line. I'd spent months preparing my departure, and nothing was going to get in my way. Come too far. Didn't stop my heart racing, and my hands becoming clammy though. I rubbed my fingers on my dress and took a deep breath before entering the room. At least I had one bit of luck. Away for the weekend with friends, Vittorio wouldn't be back until I'd left. I only had Papa's anger to face. My father stood with his hands behind his back, staring out of the window. What's this about you leaving? He asked, clenching and unclenching his fists. I hear from your mother you've been secretly planning this for a long time. He turned to face me. Are you proud of yourself? Upsetting your mother like that? It wasn't my intention to upset the mama, but I have to do this. Besides, I'm not going on my own. I'll be with Anna, and everything has been organized through a proper job agency. He glared at me. I knew that girl would be a bad influence on you. Never did like her father anyway. Couldn't keep a hold on his girls. He held up his hands in despair. I don't even want to look at you. Although Papa's voice was clipped, he remained calm. Too calm. His serenity worried me more than his anger. Was this the calm before the storm? I took a step backwards to the door. I suggest you think about this a bit more, my girl. You're making a big mistake which you might regret later. I need to go to bed. I love you all. Hope you have a good night. Thank you, Purple. Sleep well. I've been thinking about leaving for years, Papa. Just waiting for the opportunity to arrive. And now that it has, I'm going. So there's nothing else to discuss. He left the room, slamming the door behind him without waiting for an answer. I'd expected an eruption. And again, I still had 2 days to wait. There's a small break. When the time came to leave, I packed the last few things in my new suitcase. I checked my handbag once again for documents and my passport, not forgetting my purse with the money Mama had given me to see me through until I received my first wages. You didn't hear anything? Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind. I was looking at the microphone to make sure it was registering what I was doing. But I didn't look at OBS. So that might have been noise gated. Yeah, you might be right. Let me just try something real quick. Let me just... Did you hear that by chance? That registered? Okay. So I just have to be a bit more forceful when I do it so that it actually shows up. Because yeah, I do have some noise gate on. Obviously it didn't stop the dog's bark from getting through. But I can be a bit more forceful. Daddy. That's right. Indeed. You have to rub your sheet the right way. That's right. Yes. You have to really caress the pages. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You gotta bend them just the right way. Really stretch out the spine. Okay, I'm gonna stop. This is a book. Get your minds out the gutter. Hashtag forceful. Right, where was I? Oh yes. Mama had given her some money to see her through for the first wages. Kay's probably spat out her tea by now. At least traveling costs and accommodation were included in the contract. And I also forgot to turn on the music. There we go. Since our discussion in his office, my father had kept out of the way. Mealtimes were painfully quiet. Nobody knew what to say. When I'd been a young child with Papa, we had a close bond. That had all ended when I became a teenager and started to have a mind of my own. My mother entered the bedroom, wiping her face. Not one word was spoken between us. What could we say? Sorry? Let's start all over again? It's too late for that. With everything packed, I turned towards the person I'd missed the most and rushed into her arms. Don't know how I'm going to survive without you, Mama whispered, and fresh tears poured down my face. But I'll be with you, even if you can't see me. I'll always be with you. I pressed my lips against her damp cheeks, glad we were saying goodbye here rather than in the middle of the piazza with the nosy locals looking on. I didn't need them adding to my misery. Hauling my heavy case off the bed, I headed for the door. Mama collapsed onto a chair, sniffing. Why couldn't all this be a dream? Reality hurt. One last look around the room and my chest heaved. These walls had been my cocoon, their faint hues of beige, subtle yet meaningful. I breathed in the room's fragrance, soaking my mind with memories. The good ones. Down in the kitchen, Papa fiddled with the hunting equipment. He saw me approach and headed out for the front door. Had I already been dismissed from the family? Person of the past? Leaving my case by the front door, I chased after him. It's time for me to leave, Papa. Aren't you going to say goodbye? He pulled his shoulders back, and I gazed into his watery eyes. I wanted to apologize for hurting him, for the mess I'd caused. But I didn't. I was too proud, just like him. I'm going hunting, he said. I grabbed hold of his arm. Please give me your blessing. His eyes glistened before a trembling hand touched my head. He made the sign of the cross on my forehead before walking away. His blurred silhouette disappeared into the hills, swallowed up by the thick oak trees, his shotgun hitched high on his shoulder. Arrivederci, Papa, I muttered, and wiped my tears on the back of my hand. It took leaving home to make him understand how miserable I'd become, how my life had become unbearable. As much as I wanted to be happy right now, it was impossible. Maybe later, when in England. Maybe never. Anna's shouting brought me out of my thoughts. She came trundling up to me, carrying her heavy case as best as she could. I returned to where I'd left mine and picked it up before we both headed to the bus stop on the other side of the piazza. The bus came into view and Anna's fingers sank into my arm. I knew how she felt. Tight stomach, nausea rising, yet determined to leave. My mother stood in front of our house, arms wrapped around Fortunato's shoulders, tears streaming down her face, while Florinda held hands with Luca and Nino. To the left of this sorrowful picture, curtains twitched. The neighbors again, always interested. Well, they had a huge scoop today. I imagined the gossip headlines. Don Domenico's daughter brings shame to the family. Probably pregnant and going away to have the baby. Or, Don Domenico hasn't been able to keep his strong-minded daughter under control. The diesel vehicle trundled down the road, pulling my attention away from the twitching curtains. The bus rattled to a halt before the automatic doors squealed open and squealed open to an unbearable furnace. I hauled my case onto the bus and helped Anna with hers. The driver stood and took the money I handed him. I'd gripped onto the notes for so long they were damp and crinkled. He accepted them all the same. Despite the bus being packed, we managed to find seats. Anna headed for the back. I nudged 2 kids into the window seat at the front before I sat next to them, waving frantically to my family. The doors closed with a tired gasp of air, and the vehicle staggered forward on its route. My route to freedom. I'd never forget that day. 16th of June, 1958. Outside, the familiar countryside slid by. I knew every bend in the road, every tree on the side, and as the city of Tor Anzuniata appeared, every building. I'd forgotten how many times I'd taken the same journey. Bus rides were thinking things over time. I usually pondered over my dressmaking work. Today, I envisaged what lay ahead. Over the kids' heads, I glanced out of the window. Apprehension raced through me as the huge step in life, hoping I wouldn't regret it later. The seats and windows shook with every bump in the road, jostling me back and forth. An old man blew his nose with all his might, complaining he'd catch a cold. A teenager shifted continually in his seat, gazing out the window through huge sunglasses, avoiding the other passengers. Was he running away from home too? Somewhere from the back, a cough broke the silence, and I turned to Anna. "Are you okay?" She nodded and mouthed, "Everything's fine. Can't wait to get to England." Neither could I. 3/4 of an hour later, we arrived in Tor Anzuniata, hot and clammy. For once, I'd been glad of the eternal stops to pick up passengers. It brought a little fresh air into the vehicle. Brakes squeaked, and everyone jolted forward before the bus came to an abrupt stop. I pushed myself back into my seat and moaned. How on earth had the driver got his license? I retrieved my handbag, which had taken a dive under the seat in front of me, and Anna joined me from the back of the bus. We grabbed our cases and stepped off the vehicle, scanning the area for Ornella. She stood on the other side of the street, leaning against a lamppost in a nerve-ending queue. She was the perfect image of a person without a care in the world. Confident, at ease, jovial, until I gazed at her feet. Her left foot tapped full tilt like a tap dancer in the final few minutes of a stage show. Shit. If Ornella was nervous, what were we going to do? My heart thumped in time with her foot tempo, missing a few beats now and again. I hoped she wouldn't chicken out. She was the only one who spoke English. What would we do without her? I closed my eyes for a few seconds and said a silent prayer before standing with Anna and Ornella in the queue for the local bus to Naples. Ladies! We all turned at the same time. An eye-catching young lady strolled towards us. Ink-black hair fell in soft layers around her shoulders, and her cheeks were rugged. She had a beautiful face, and amazing celeste blue eyes. Ciao. It was nice to hear the warm, reassuring voice. I'm Alessandra. I've been sent by the job agency to be your interpreter, and to accompany you until your final destination in England. Her face lit up when she spoke. I liked her already. Another bus arrived, its engine releasing a deep sigh. We climbed into the old, rusty vehicle, which turned out to be worse than the one we traveled on to Tor Annunziata. I followed my friends to the back, where it appeared to be hotter, with a heavier smell of sweat and garlic. With my hand over my nose, I whispered into Anna's ear. It stinks back here. We can't be choosy, she said, shoving her face forward with her foot. and I'm not prepared to stand for hours' journey to Naples. I reached up and pulled the top of the skinny window open before slipping into the aisle seat opposite her. Ornella and Alessandra sat in the 2 seats behind me and didn't seem to mind the stench. I kept my head turned away from the old man in the window seat next to me, puffing away at his cigarette as if it were going out of style. Trying to ignore the smell of the smoke, I closed my eyes and waited for the hour's journey to Naples to end, hoping we'd get luckier with the train. We didn't. The train had seen better days. Rusty railing made up the walls of the carriage, and strained fabric covered the seating. My hands rested on my knees. No way I wanted to touch the seats. How many people had sat on them? People whose clothes were grimy and smelly? I turned my gaze to the world outside, while Anna read her book and Ornella and Alessandra chatted together on the other side of the aisle. When would we get going? Through the grimy windows, a familiar silhouette came into view, frantically searching the platform. My legs began to shake. How did Vittorio know where to find me? Maybe he hadn't been with his girlfriend earlier. He'd been waiting for me in Naples. I crouched down between the seats, my stomach rock hard. What are you doing? Anna asked. Vittorio! Anna turned alabaster and spun her head to stare outside. She gripped my shoulder so tight her nails dug into my skin. He's climbing onto the train. Her voice came out in a frightened whisper. My inside screamed. He wouldn't give up, determined to take me back home, to my life of submission and abuse. Would this nightmare never end? What was he doing here? Papa had given me his blessing. Surely Vittorio wouldn't go against Papa's wishes. I kept my head down and stared at Anna's tapping feet. Sweat trickled down my back and struck under my armpits. My perspiration never smelt, apart from now. Anna tried to keep her face carefree. If it fooled the other passengers, it didn't fool me. Her set jaw and damp forehead showed her panic. Tears flooded my eyes, and no more noises reached my ears. The only thing that kept me from fainting was the pain from Anna's fingers gripping me tight. 2 shiny shoes came into view, and a heavy hand gripped my hair. There you are, Vittorio spat, tugging at my roots. Did you think you could get away? Let go of me, I shouted, scratching his hand. Papa gave me his blessing. Well, he changed his mind. You're lying, Vittorio. Papa gave me his blessing, and he would never go back on his word. Excuse me. I don't care what he gave you. You're coming home. Papa will thank me for coming after you. Hatred was visible on his face, in the air, in his hold. You're out of your mind, I shouted. He yanked me to my feet and dragged me down the aisle to the door. Anna followed, hammering her fists on his back. Let go of her! Vittorio thrust an elbow behind him and must have hit Anna from the loud shriek that rang in the air. The carriage only had a few other passengers, and they kept to themselves. One woman had her hand over her mouth, and the men continued reading as if this sort of thing happened every day. Wouldn't someone come to my aid? We were nearing the steps leading off the train, and little by little, my freedom was slipping away. I gripped the rail and refused to let go, determined to remain on the train. If I let go, I'd be down the steps and onto the platform in the blink of an eye. The shrill of a whistle brought Vittorio to his senses. He loosened his hold but didn't release me. A man rushed forward and clambered my brother on his back. We both turned to face the ticket controller looming above us. My brother let go of my hair and grabbed my arm. "Train is leaving, sir. May I have your ticket, please?" His calm voice reflected his face, set in poker style. "I don't have a ticket, so clear off. We're both getting off the train." I peered up and met the man's gaze, hoping he'd detect the distress in my eyes. His face was covered by a beard, with a scar that slid from his left eye down to his jaw. This didn't look like a person who would take any stick. At least, I hope he wouldn't. "If you're getting off too," he said, looking my way, "then you'd better return for your case." Vittorio pushed me forward, and I stumbled past the controller. No sooner had I done so, the man grabbed my brothers by the collar and shoved him towards the door. Vittorio dug his heels in, swearing and shouting. No avail. 2 Carabinieri stood on the platform, hands on their hips. One had a finger placed on his pistol, no doubt ready to take action should things get out of hand, though they appeared calm. It was hard to tell where or who they were looking at. Dark sunglasses hid their eyes. My brother landed on the platform in an ungraceful roll. He must have hurt himself, but he'd asked for it. Shouldn't have tried to throw his weight around with the controller. Vittorio had finally met his match. He hadn't learned the hard way that not everyone obeyed him without asking questions. The policemen pulled Vittorio to his feet, ignoring his struggles. He shouted that he was only looking for his sister, who had run away from home. They didn't look amused or worried. That was the last I saw of my brother. Trapped between 2 Carabinieri, kicking and fighting as they took him away. I followed my fear, and on unsteady legs, I headed back to my seat. The girls' faces were a reflection of mine. Teary eyes, cheeks drained of all color. That had been a close escape. The controller returned and smiled down at us. "Everything all right, ladies?" "Everything's fine," Anna replied, fluttering her eyelashes, and the man returned to check the other passengers' tickets. A wave of relief flowed through me as the carriages pulled out of the station. The train crept down the track, rocking me back and forth while it gathered speed. First time since I'd left Santa Maria la Carita. The knot inside me loosened. Small break in the story, as we are now, it looks like, off the train and somewhere else. I clung to the ferry's railing, sucking in the deep breaths of the sea air. Now and again, salt spray prickled my face. My muscles clenched, and the waves of nausea fluttered in my stomach. I hadn't expected a crossing like this. Who would have guessed the stretch of water would be so rough? Through narrowed eyes, I tried to take in the view of the English Channel, but it was difficult to tell where the grey sky ended and the grey sea began. In fact, I was surrounded by the same color. Even my friends' faces had taken on a dove green tone. I will take a drink. Good idea. Thank you, Carly. From From the way my stomach swayed, I'd bet anything my face matched theirs. After taking the train at Naples, we'd stopped off at Rome to pick up 2 more girls who had arrived by boat from Sardinia. Sisters, in fact. Their parents hadn't been able to financially support them, and so the only way out had been to try their luck in England. We jostled around in the carriage until Milano. 6.5 hours of swaying. I had to admit the movement sent me to sleep. Not a good thing, because when it was time to settle down for the night, on the couchettes, of course, I wasn't tired, and spent most of the night thinking how lucky I was. Before Anna had mentioned the newspaper clipping, we'd had no control over our lives. And to top it all, I'd had to put up with Vittorio and his physical abuse. This offer of a job abroad had been our chance for freedom. The boat's bellowing horn broke the sound of the lapping waves, and I jolted out of my reverie. The sea's strange tones of blues and grays brought new designs to mind. Thank God I'd slipped my sketch pad and crayons into my handbag. There was some great color-changing movement to capture from the sea. "Sketching again?" Anna asked. I nodded. "You never know. One day they might come in handy." And they would. I had to bide my time, make some money, learn the language, and then I'd find a way to get a better job as a dressmaker. When that day came, all these sketches would be part of my collection. I couldn't expect to work in a huge fashion house right away, not at a young age with little experience. But I'd get there. We all had to start small and work our way to the top. One day, I'd stand on the highest step of the podium. We approached the shore, and a giant hand tossed aside the huge blanket covering the sea. The white cliffs of Dover came into view. Towers of chalk rock dominated the shore. It was one of England's most spectacular features. I'd seen photos of them in my school books. Who would have guessed I'd see them for real one day? Anna grabbed my hand, and tears formed in my eyes. Something gripped at my insides, making my legs tingle and my heart sink. Too much emotion. Here I was, heading for a new life, unaware of what my future held. And my sister's words came creeping back. Kidnapped. Forced into prostitution. Anna must have sensed my disarray. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders and gave my cheek a quick peck. "We've done the right thing, Bianca." I only hoped she was right. We stepped off the boat and headed for the terminal building. Dragging my case, I followed the other girls. For a brief moment, I stopped and glared down at the case. My life sat in there. All my possessions were held in one piece of luggage. My bottom lip trembled. I'd landed in a country where I couldn't speak or understand a word of the language. I was determined to succeed. An announcement blasted around the bus terminal. Although I didn't understand what the voice said, it sounded important. People pushed and shoved, zigzagging their way out of the building. For them, another normal day began. Going to work or going about their daily chores. For me, it was the start of a new life. Alessandra escorted us onto a bus for the last leg of our voyage. The diesel engine took forever to roar to life. When it did, the rickety bus bounced me up and down as it trundled from the depot. My hands gripped the seat, and my pulse rocketed as the driver set off on the wrong side of the road. Did he know what he was doing? What if we had an accident? Overcome with fear and excitement, I risked a quick glance at the other passengers. They were mostly girls like me, looking for a new life. Puffy eyes and tired bodies slumped in dusty seats were my only view. After another long 3 hours, I stepped off the bus beneath an ash-gray sky. It appeared to be the in color in England. A congregation of dull clouds blocked out the sun, promising nothing but rain. We had arrived in a town called Long Sutton, whatever that meant. If it did mean anything. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter around me. We'd left Naples under a blazing sun to finish up in a dull fridge. A tall red brick building loomed over me, doing nothing to make me feel welcome. It reminded me of a sketch I'd seen in a schoolbook, the history manual that would explain the Industrial Revolution back in the 1800s. Hadn't things progressed since? A bubbly girl with a white apron and headscarf of the same color welcomed us, and Alessandra introduced us to Giulia, who would look after us during our 6-month contract. Alessandra said goodbye to us and left. She brought her girls to safety and could now return home to Italy. Giulia took us into Moro's building, and into a different world. Cold, austere, unfriendly even. No time for a quick tour, we were led straight to the sleeping quarters. The dormitory resembled a hospital ward. Narrow beds were set close to one another, and the room smelt bizarre. A mixture of every girl's perfume. Sweet, sickly scents mingled with the stronger, overpowering smell of musk. When time came to sleep, strange sounds kept me awake. Clang of radiators or heels on the flagstones as a girl headed to the toilets. At times it was the starched rustle of sheets being pulled across beds. Of course, Italy remained in the back of my mind, haunting me. No matter how hard I tried to forget and start afresh, I cried myself to sleep. I simply missed my parents. No way would I write and tell them that, though. Determination was my second strong point, stubbornness my first. Besides, I didn't want to give my father the satisfaction of saying I told you so. I wouldn't be here for long. For my 6 months, my contract would draw to an end, and I'd look for a dressmaking job. How, I didn't know. Maybe with help from some of the other girls in the factory who spoke English. That said, no one needed to speak to create and sew. If I wanted to make a name for myself in the fashion world, I had to improve my English fast.